Recently, and by recently, I mean like 8 months ago, I had never a, had an experience before this. I moved to an island in the South Pacific and have gotten the hiking bug, so I try and get out to new locations as much as I possibly can. What with work eating and my precious time. This happened about 2 weeks ago. Since I live in the South Pacific region, I get mighty hot driving all by the most insane hikers indoors unless it's at night. Of course, I'm not a masochist, so I try to do all my hiking in the early hours of the morning or the in the evening when it starts to get cool. I've never been afraid of going hiking by myself. I did it when I lived in Oregon and never ran into any problems with it. But my island isn't my friendly home state. I always carry pepper spray, and when I used to go hiking in Montana and Wyoming, would sometimes carry a handgun to ward off anything I couldn't take on, whether it was a bear or a person. But I had always gotten off considerably lucky. I got to the trailhead at about 6:30 in the evening. The trail was called Thousand Steps, but in all honesty, it was mostly just a walk straight down to the cliff and then a grueling journey back up. I didn't want to go, but my dog, Mad Moxie, decided to be needed to be walked, and I had done the hike so many times I could probably do it in my sleep. The first thing I noticed when I pulled up was an old rickety, rusted out blue pickup truck with a big plastic tarp over the bed to keep out the rain. These are pretty common on the island, affectionately earning them the name Guam bombs. I didn't think much of it as I hooked up Moxie and started heading down the trail, trying my best to ignore the mosquitoes that were making a meal out of my exposed neck. Heading down the trail was relatively easy, avoiding the banana spider webs. I felt the stress of my days slowly unwind as the underbrush grew darker and night approached. I made it all the way down to the water's edge when I noticed a man standing about 100 yards away. It was so dark enough that I could only see his silhouette. So I have no idea if he was looking at me or at the water, but I chose to ignore him and instead pull Moxie's ball from my backpack and throw it for her a few times to get all her wiggles out. After some time, the man started walking over to me and stopped maybe about 10 feet away. Now, I'm a tiny waif of a woman. I'm 23-year-old and I stand at 5'6", and this guy was a couple inches taller than me. But most of the locals were on the smaller side. But something about him just felt weird. Evening, I greeted him as he nodded and looked down at Moxie, who just returned from running after her ball. I stooped down to pet her humidity-soaked head as the man kept his trained eyes on my dog. "Can I help you, sir?" "Pretty dog," he responded mildly. "You alone?" "I have my dog," I said lamely, trying to sound braver than I was feeling. "I'm never alone." I tried to emphasize on the fact that I had my dog with me, but the man seemed unfazed by my statement. "Oh, have a good night." With that, he turned around and started walking back towards the trailhead. I watched his shadow disappear into the trees and waited for about half an hour before I too started walking back towards the path, my mind on high alert as Moxie pulled me through the trees and up the cliff. The crickets pierced the night as I climbed the steps, illuminated by my flashlight. The hands were full with Moxie's leash in my light, but you could bet your buns that I would have pepper spray out if I had an extra hand. Finally, my light pierced the trees, and I practically booked it up the hill. When I got to the top, I nearly shat myself. The rusted blue pickup truck was sitting in the parking lot still, but their passenger side door was practically touching my car side driver inside of the car. I could faintly see two men sitting in the cab, and I could feel them watching me. Slowly, I approached my car, walking as far over to the passenger side as I could, and kept Moxie with me as close as I opened the door and crawled over to the driver's side. At that moment, the door of the pickup truck flew open, and my dog started going ape shit. back at the barking at the two people who were now outside of the car and trying to break into mine. Heart in my chest, I rammed the keys into the ignition and tore out of the parking lot so quickly I nearly took my mirror off. I called my mom as soon as I got home, and she begged me to call the police. Unfortunately, the police here on the island aren't as vigilant as they are on the mainland, and the area is known for car thefts, muggings, and other debaucheries. As I leaned for my cow workers later that week, earlier this month, another girl actually disappeared from the area without a trace, and it makes me wonder if the men in the blue pickup truck didn't have something to do with it. If I hadn't had Moxie with me, would I have been mugged or worse? If I learned anything from this experience is that from my lady hikers, please always take pepper spray with you. Going hiking in groups, go hiking in groups, and always let someone know where you're going, and it might save your life someday. And to the men in the pickup truck, let's never meet again. I'm a 33-year-old white female from Los Angeles. 3 years ago, my boyfriend and I, as planned for 5 years, turned 30, sold everything we owned, including my car, took his Trailblazer, and decided to just travel around the States and Canada. I guess you could call us backpackers as we tend to chase good weather, flying to state park and backcountry, hike in the wilderness for days at a time. My brother likes to joke that we are anti-establishment hippies. We don't necessarily live off the grid, but between the two of us, we have one prepaid phone we use for emergencies or checking in with family and friends, and one MacBook for which I use for work. I'm a freelancer and slash content creator, and I am on retainer with robotics company. I mostly write boring white papers or web content. The whole point of our li- living situation is to live debt free and have as few bills as possible. I only use free Wi-Fi, so 2 times a week we have to go to a city with a Starbucks. The background info is only important so you know more about who we are and how simply we live. Neither of us are involved in social media, and because very little of Reddit or Instagram use any use any apps. Because our phone isn't a smartphone, we don't even text. Last summer we decided to do some backcountry hiking in Arkansas. It's one of those states you don't really ever hear about hikers visiting, but we read that it had some beautiful natural landscapes. It does. The rules at the particular park we were pretty lax. We didn't need a permit. They were basically a few basic laws slash guidelines, but there were no check-in needed. We all had the basics and had planned to do a 6-day hike, 3 in, 3 out. The whole time we were out there, we didn't see or hear another soul. But on day one, we were passing and prepping to move off trail and find a camping spot as it was getting near dusk. A half-mile off trail is usually the standard for us. We took what we like of an animal trail, and about a half mile out we saw a green two-person tent. It was almost camouflaged in the foliage, so we came on it almost by accident. Some backpackers prefer privacy, others are more social. We're the social types. We've had some great experiences camping near other backpackers, sharing stories, food, and a joint or two. We were around 30 yards away from the tent. It was zipped closed, so my boyfriend shouted a greeting to make our presence known. No movement and no sound. We assumed the green tent guy either wasn't around or didn't want to be bothered, so we started off in a new direction to get some distance between us. We camped. We camped. Never heard a peep. We moved along the next morning, completely forgotten about green tent guy until nearly the end of our on day 5 on our trek back. We were again looking for a spot to camp off the trail when we came across the green tent again. This isn't that unusual, but normally backcountry hikers keep moving, so we weren't really expecting it. The tent flap was open, so my boyfriend yells his greeting again and says nothing. My boyfriend wants to go check it out, saying it's weird and someone is hurt. I didn't like the idea from that from the get go because even though we haven't had any bad experiences personally, we heard enough stories from other backpackers about hermits and mountain men that were privacy that want privacy, carry guns, etc. But my boyfriend assured me that we'd be fine if all else fails. Offer him some weed and keep the peace, and we'd soon be on our way. As soon as we get within 20 yards of the place, the smell of decomposition is intense. My boyfriend his hail has been hailing his green over the last 20 yards, and once the smell hits him, he stops and turns to me and says, "What if we find a dead body?" My skin crawled. I was immediately afraid. I've never seen a dead body before, and I don't want to. The closer we got to the tent, the worse the smell got. I knew for sure we weren't going to walk in and see some old camper's rotting corpse. What we found was worse than that. Outside the tent was a dead doe's leg, all four of them, covered in flies. It looked like the legs had been cut off most of the way and then ripped off the rest of the way. It was a mess. Inside was the body and the head of the deer, but the middle portion was swaddled in a blue fleece blanket that was blood-soaked at the bottom where the legs used to be. It was laying on its side, bottom facing the tent entry. The tail had been cut off, and the anus/vagina was covered in a dried blood and agape, like someone had been penetrating it. The same with its mouth. The bottom portion was bent and had a scary, broken-looking angle. The tent was open so we could see everything without having to go inside. Not that we would have anything, because at this point the smell was almost debilitating. There was a dirty, almost empty clear bottle of Jergens baby oil and a stained green and white fringed kitchen towel. That was it. I immediately started crying and begged him to go. All he could muster was, what the fuck? And we turned and ran. We ran to the trail and jogged down it for as far as we could go until dusk was fully on us, and we had to set up camp. We didn't go very far off the trail, and neither of us slept. We didn't start a fire or use headlamps after full dark. We just sat up, whispering to each other, going over and what we had just seen. Every little noise startled us. It was like our brains were on red alert. I kept thinking any moment a dead deer rapist would come back to his tent, see our footprint or something, know we were in there, track us back towards our tent. I've never been so scared in my entire life. Just before dawn, we tore down and started out. My boyfriend stopped at the ranger station, and on our way out of the park to report what we had seen. The ranger was a young guy around our age, and he looked as freaked out by our story as we were telling it. He wrote most of it down, but my boyfriend showed him on the map approximately where it had been. He asked if we knew how the deer was killed, and at that point we hadn't even thought about it. We assumed it had been shot, but because of the blanket we didn't see the wound, but we weren't exactly giving it an autopsy either. We have since shortened our backcountry hikes to a maximum of 4 days. We've also been a lot less eager to call out other campsites, and have never approached another unmanned tent